Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are, and thank you for joining us. I'm Evan Fallenberg, and I'm delighted to host today's event, the premiere screening of a brand new short film and a conversation with some of the people involved, including writer and filmmaker Edgar, choreographer and designer Cannibal Pinto, and Caitlin Roper, whom I would dub a literary impresaria, now the New York Times executive producer for scripted projects in Hollywood. Mischkenot She'ananim is proud to support this unique project and would like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Factory 54 for their support. So before we screen the film, let's get a little background. Caitlin, hi.
Hi.
You were running the Mag Lab for the New York Times and came up with the Decameron Project with the tagline of "When reality is surreal, only fiction can make sense of it." It's no wonder you thought to invite Edgar to be one of the contributors. So tell us about how the project came about.
Sure thing. I mean, really what was happening is that at the beginning of quarantine here in the United States, people started reading Boccaccio's 14th century book, The Decameron. And the novelist Rivka Galchen pitched an idea to the magazine. What if she wrote an essay recommending Boccaccio's Decameron right now for people to read to help understand this moment? And we sort of took that idea and said, well, what if instead we created our own Decameron, this book of all these nested stories of people who are sheltering during the Black Death outside of Florence in Italy. So instead we thought, why don't we reach out to writers around the world and see if they would like to write fiction in this very strange time. And that's how the project came to be. And anytime over the course of my career that I needed someone to write a very interesting and potentially weird short story, I've always reached out to Edgar.
Well, tell us a little about your history with Edgar. I mean, the parts that we can hear.
Yes, it's a weird story link, but basically I was at the Paris Review, the literary magazine, and that's where I first met Edgar and his work, and then read everything I could. And then years later, I was at Wired magazine, where I did an all fiction issue, and again reached out to Edgar. Any place that doesn't usually publish fiction, including the New York Times magazine, I tend to find a way to get fiction into it. And that's what led me back to reaching out to Edgar again.
And who were some of the other writers you brought into the project?
Margaret Atwood wrote a story, David Mitchell, Leila Slimani, John Ray, Alejandro Zambra, the Italian writer Paolo Giordano. So there was a lot of different writers, Mona Awad. There was in total 29 short stories, of which Edgar's was one, and a real range of kinds of stories.
Yeah, they're really wonderful, and they're available online to anybody who wants to find them, and I highly recommend reading all of them. So Edgar, your 500-word story, Outside, appeared in the Decameron Project issue in early July, and this is hardly the first time a story of yours has been turned into a film. I think there are more than 60 of those, some of which were your doing, and mostly the work, I believe, of other people. So tell us a little about this one. How similar is the film to the story, or how much of it did you have to change of the text itself?
Well, first of all, I think that if a film is similar to the stories, then there's not much point in making a film out of it. Like, we don't make film for lazy people who don't want to read. You know, I think that an adaptation should always be an interesting and original reading of a text. And I never adapt my own work on my own. I need to have a collaborator who has a fresh perspective and who puts everything into context. And when Cannibal offered me to make this short movie, Videodance together, then I was very, very happy, because I love Canibal's work, and it was a wonderful chance to work with her. And I always have, when I think about Canibal's work, I always think about fairy tales. And in fairy tales, you know, we always use this term fairy tales as something beautiful, but fairy tales can be very, very dark and very, very dangerous and go beyond certain taboos. And the idea of kind of taking the story that, you know, the story that I wrote for Caitlin, that Caitlin published, was I wouldn't say that it was kind of a hyper-realistic, but it was some kind of an inner voice, and there was something about it that kind of tried to cling to reality as we know it. Maybe because for me it was kind of a semi-biographical, because I had a problem going back and being with people after the quarantine, and the moment that Inbal stepped in, what I saw in my mind was kind of a Alice in Wonderland and Mad Hatters and all those people who live in this kind of COVID land. Because for me, I think that when you're in quarantine and you separate yourself from reality, then in a way your imagination goes wild and there is nobody there can challenge it. So your life actually become more of a fairy tale, even if you live in some kind of a mundane surrounding, because there's nobody there to say to you, you're not really flying, you're just lying on the carpet, you know. So for me, it was kind of like even before we started adapting and finding the location and everything, there was something with the Inbal spirit and presence and all the past works of hers that I saw that kind of sent me to a certain direction.
That's fantastic. We're going to definitely come back to the issues of collaboration and adaptation, two of the things that you brought up. But I'd like to do that after we watch the film. But one more question for you before we move on a little bit. You dabble in a lot of different media. You really do, and it's fantastic. But I think this may be the first time you've done something with Videodance. Is that true?
Yes, for sure. And again, and I want to say, I think for me, it's kind of a coincidence that it's dancing. For me, it's more working with Inbal than, you know, I think, you know, it's like when I showed it to my best friend, this movie, and he says, oh, it's a Japanese talking movie. And it was the first time I noticed it. Because for me, like, you know, I saw Mirai and I saw his role and where he's working. And actually, yeah, he's speaking Japanese, and yeah, they're dancing. But I think that there is something that when you're inside the process, you know, for good and bad, you kind of go beyond it. And you look at the people around you and you see if they have something imaginative and earnest to give. And if what they're saying is, you can kind of pick up those nuances, and all the other things are less important.
Mm-hmm. So, Inbal, hello, good evening.
Good evening.
It was actually you who came to Edgar with this project, right? How did that happen, and why Japan?
Well, it was a month and a half into the quarantine when I got the phone call from Arya Rosen, who is the culture attaché in the Israeli culture attaché in Japan, and he told me, let's do something. And I said, let's do, you know, which I didn't know what. And the next thing is, I have an idea, maybe you should collaborate with Edgar. I got the story, the outside story, and I read it and I felt like it's brilliant written and describe the situation, describe a physical situation, which I'm most connected to a physical aspect of a story when I'm doing adaptation. So I had a strong feeling about what it should be, and it's really related to my own feeling of how what the quarantine is actually doing to my own body and to my friends, the dancers that are limited in space, limited in stage, and cannot really express their own art. Actually, the dancers that are participating, Mohan Miller, she called me a couple of days, like a month and a half into it. She said, I don't know what to do. I'm running every day. I'm just like, that's the only way I can actually express my movement. And that's the only thing that was possible actually in Israel. You could not live 100 meters more and rather if you're doing sport or running somewhere. So it was really incredible that, it was like the only way of expressing it.
And you said you felt something physical right from the beginning, from the first time you read this story. So there was some sort of transference, something going on inside your body when you read the story.
Yeah, it was something that was, in a way, something that was reflecting already an feeling that is really releasing and stacked bodies. And my first image was like the people that are stuck in the doors between the outside and the in, and they cannot, you know, the conflict of the fear that are of like dealing with what's going on outside, and also the wish to leave their own apartment and to do whatever they used to do. So there is it was that feeling. I mean, and then of course when Edgar came, it took so many directions, and we had a trip like just exchanging ideas, and it was really fun. Just and we actually wrote few synopsises that and many, so maybe we can have like 3-4 movies out of that.
I think that would be a great idea. You've already made a beautiful film, which I think it's a good time to show now. Just one thing before we show the film, anything that any of you want to say by way of introduction for the people?
I just want to say that you know that there is something within Buzz energy. It always comes from a place that is kind of very pure and very earnest. You know, it's like I'm in this story. Like I mean, she's Alice, and I'm the Mad Hatter. You know, she's like kind of the kind-hearted person who really believes in things. And I want to say that we had a meeting with a producer, and the producer was a mutual friend that got fired, you know, during the coronavirus, and basically she was helping us produce it. And we had a few $1,000s that we were promised from the ministry, from the foreign ministry. And I was sitting with the environment producer, and I said, listen, we don't have enough money to do anything. It doesn't matter if we don't get paid, if we don't get salaries, you know, we just can't make it. You know, it's a nice idea, it's a nice thing, but we can't do it. And Impact said, but we're already rolling, like we already started thinking, we have images in our minds. How can we stop that? And I said, okay, let me think about it. And then when I left, I realized that, you know, that she was right, and that the only way we can do it would be if we get some more money. And for the first time in my life, I called משכנות, who are hosting this. I called the Factory 54, who are a big fashion business, you know, and I would say, hey, would you like to give money for a very strange and obscure cultural project that would probably last for 7 minutes? And strangely, almost everybody said okay.
I have a feeling this film is going to last for much longer than its own 7 minutes. Let's watch the film outside, and we'll reconvene in about 7 minutes.
葉を落とし、家から出るよう命じ始める。
ATM の近くに汚れた服を着た男が座っていて、その横にはブリキのコップが置いてある。こういう状況ではどう振る舞うべきなのか、それはよく覚えている。その男の前を素早く通り過ぎ、もう2日間何も食べていないんですというしわがれた声を聞くと、反対の方に目をやって目線を合わせないようにする。まるで何も怖がることはない。自転車に乗るのと同じだ。すべて体が勝手に覚えている。そして一人でいる間に柔らかくなった心は、あっという間にまた固く戻っていく。
So it definitely, the sound, I don't know, on what I was hearing was a little bit, go ahead, Edgar.
The strobe effect for some reason, I don't know if you're gonna
yeah.
there was a problem.
However, very soon you'll be able to watch the film on YouTube, so you can see it again. But this brings me to something that
on a special website that Inbal had illustrated. It's like it's outside. I don't know how you call this line in the middle. Outsidefilm.com.
Okay. Dash. Yeah. Good. Yes. So you'll be able to watch that quite soon. But one thing I noticed was, and this made it even clearer to me, was that I've seen the film a number of times on my computer and really enjoyed it. And last night, I saw it on a very large screen. And I think it's a general kind of conventional wisdom that it's always better to see a film on a large screen. And I came away thinking, no, I really like it on my computer. I really like it small. And then I realized it may have something to do with the format itself, the boxiness of the film. It's a box inside a box inside the box of our computer. And my preference will continue to be to watch it in the small format on the computer. So Inbal, tell us about, again, about adapting the story to its new medium and working with its author. And I know that you, in your choreography, you tend to work with words. It's not something that's foreign to you, and although it's not something usual necessarily in choreography and dance. And if you could help decipher something that's always confounded me, if you ask somebody to watch Swan Lake, for example, and then tell the story of Swan Lake without knowing it, it's virtually impossible. And yet there is a connection in the mind of the choreographer and probably in the mind of the dancers and the minds of the viewers if they know the original story. So how do you take something, an art form that's so different from the one that you're accustomed to working in, and move it through time, space, art, whatever you want to call it, to create this new vision of yours? You're muted.
Are we okay?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. When I don't work on, usually when I do dance, I don't work with text. I do, but I do feel like I'm a storyteller. I'm telling a story which is much more open for different expression, and each one can tell his own story by his own interpretation. And when I take a text like Edgar's text, but just before I did Edgar, I directed Haruki Murakami's novel Wind Up a Chronicle in Japan, and I try to take big scenes or like big expressions into to minimalize it into visual and physical text. And sometimes for me, also in dance, when I can say ideas in words, I try to transform it. How can I say something without word? And how can I say it through my body? So slowly, I find more and more tools to actually give, project ideas that are verbally, you can say many words around it, but it has a physical expression and visual expression, which can say the same thing. Mm. So I had the same, when I read the book, as I said before, like it was totally a physical expression, and that's what I'm looking. I actually got two more stories of Edgar, and I felt very connected to this one because of this physical effect that it had on me.
So in other words, you don't really start. You're not going to take on a project that you don't feel something physical / visual toward.
I assume that I can find in anything physical. I can put physical ideas, but there's some text that I can feel it more. So I rather do it on those ones.
Right. Edgar, you mentioned that you had to do some things like raising money that you haven't done before. And when you and I spoke a few days ago, you mentioned that you see this as a kind of an artist rebellion, a statement in the face of the oppressiveness of this particular period, which you compared to, you know, like an oppressive regime. And it's interesting because I think this period is dividing artists, and maybe especially writers, between the ones who are feeling comfortable to step away from the world and very quietly go about their art and do nothing public. It's the opportunity to do nothing public at this time. And you said you felt you needed to step up in a way, that this is a kind of a statement. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say something about the art word. That the art word, like anything else in a word, has a very strong element of the force of inertia. A lot of stuff that I create is because somebody commissions something for me, asked me to do something, I develop a TV series for somebody, you know. So I go to work the same way that other people go to work. And I think that actually the more established you become, the more on track you become with those kind of commitments that kind of maybe take you a step away from your authentic wishes. And for me, it's always the dichotomy is between inertia and authenticity. And there was something about the time of the coronavirus that it puts you in a very authentic zone, because the force of the inertia was totally neutralized. Because, you know, if you get up in the morning, go to work, pick up the kid, go to the supermarket, suddenly you get up and say, okay, what the hell should I do now? And I think that for me, this is a call, you know, for artists, because this idea to say, okay, you know, what am I going to do now? Not do anything or not create or not put my stuff out there because there isn't a system to support it, you know? It kind of made me feel very spoiled. You know, when I was 19 years old, and I began writing during my compulsory army service, you know, I would copy copies of stories and give it to people who would tear it to pieces in front of my face, and I would keep kind of seeking readers, you know, because this is what a writer does. So I felt that it kind of reminded me that, you know, this idea is that if I'm in a dialogue with the world around me, I shouldn't be like this good kid who sits in the back of the class and waits for the teacher to give him permission to speak, you know. If something bothered me, I should shout, you know, and if they send me out or from the class, it's okay. And if I go to people and beg them for money and they wouldn't want to give it to me, it's also okay. But and it's not that I don't wish to go back to those easier going times, but it all kind of brings back a sentence I told in Bali yesterday. This sentence that my father once told me, because my father was the Holocaust survivor, and I said to him, "Can you imagine a period in history that was worse than the Holocaust?" And he said to me, for him there are no good periods and bad periods. He said there are easy periods and difficult periods, and usually, and most of the time in the difficult periods, you learn more about yourself. And I think that, you know, in a difficult period where we can all learn more about ourselves, you know, as an artist, then maybe you can't get your stuff out there, but at the very least I felt that I was feeling that I should try.
That's, yeah. You know, you remind me that when my first novel was coming out, an older, wiser, very successful novelist who one of his books had been chosen as an Oprah book, and, you know, his career and life completely changed. He said to me, you know, I look back on those days, what you're going through, and I'm jealous of you that nobody's waiting. Nobody has any anticipation. And I thought, well, you know, I'd like to be in your shoes, really. But, you know, I understand what he was saying was just being able to sit and create and not having to, you know, nobody was waiting. Nobody waiting for you. Just you're doing it because that's what you want to be doing. many artists, I think the vast majority of artists would like to get a phone call, though, from Caitlin, for example, because she does commission work. And, you know, again, yes, Edgar, you want to say something? You were raising your finger.
I'm waiting for another phone call. No, because the truth is that every time that Caitlin calls, some of my better and I think more important stories come out. I don't know, because I really feel that first of all, this kind of a vocation of bringing fiction to places where no fiction had walked before, you know, then it's something that it's really with me, you know, because I printed story on a Roma placement, you know, they sell it in New York, cakes wrapped in my stories. I really feel that fiction many times is being put in some kind of a ghetto, a kind of an elitist ghetto. And for me, like, I would want to have stories on billboards, and basically Caitlin is doing that all the time. But it's not only that, but I think that whenever she kind of defines a project, there is something in the premise that gets my brain rolling.
Well, and that's the whole, I mean, you know, I like my whole motivation is it overlaps with Inbal and Edgar, which is like, it's not form specific, right? Like I have worked in magazines for a long time and now I'm working in storytelling and film, but the point is that the story has to move you, you know, and it has to be something new in a different form. And I think so much of the way we consume art is in these formulas, right? Like I'm in the mood for this. You know, and we even get trained to expect it, right? Now is a time for fiction. No, now is a time for nonfiction. Like now is a time for dance. And no, now it's not a shared experience. This is my private time on my phone, you know? But the truth is like, it doesn't really, it's not so binary. Things don't have to work that way, right? And in fact, sometimes like the impulse is to create something that's different, to just do something a little different. And creative collaboration is part of what I love. That's why I love magazines, because a lot of, you know, art and edit work together to create something else that they couldn't make alone if they were separate teams. And same in film. Like, you know, there's no film, there's no short film, there's no outside film without a bunch of different people with different skills creating something else. You know, and I think like one other thing that you guys have talked about, which is this time, COVID, is so strange that it also forces you to think differently. And in the story itself, you know, Edgar's story, you know, I know we don't have time to put the text of the story on the screen for everyone to read it, but I encourage you all to read it. It's really about, you know, what, for me, it was about like, how are you inside? Are you kept entrapped by science because you know there are risks? Is it society and a desire to keep each other safe? Is it your own personal containment, you know? And then when that's released, when you're free in the world, what does that really mean? You know, what does it mean to be sort of trapped inside? And I think like the movie does so much for me to, like you were saying, Inbal, it's like it captures how, like the beginning where she's physically alone, you know, but expressing herself with her body reminded me of what it felt like to be like, this is crazy. We're inside. We can't go outside. This is it. We're just here. You know, It's like you sort of felt like you're in your own short film of yourself. Like, you know, like almost like a mime. I'm trapped inside. What, you know, what am I doing? Is this, you know, can I go outside? Is it dangerous? Anyway, I'm rambling.
And I want to say something really about that. That one of the most common narratives that I've heard during the COVID period was a narrative of victimhood. Like, you know, everything was so wonderful. We were in California. We were hugging each other all the time and going outdoors, and everything was great. And then, like, you know, this kind of nature turned on us. God doesn't like us anymore, and there is something about all. First of all, I find this narrative false because, you know, we were assholes and we probably stay assholes. And I don't think that this process can bring things to our consciousness. I think that, you know, that let's say when I look in Israel, how the Secret Service is monitoring phones to find COVID patient, or when I look at the sky and I see people not flying in planes, on planes for vacations, and I say, you know, the word, when we go back, we could choose either we will fly less and save our Earth, you know, or we could keep monitoring phones even when there's no COVID, because who knows, you know, those lefties and Chinese and communists are all around us. So I'm saying it's actually, it's time of reflection, and it's time in which we can learn new things about ourselves and take responsibility for what we do. Because one of the things that I say is that, you know, when people say, oh, the world will not be the same. Okay, the world will not be the same, but who says it's going to be any worse? Because the fact that physical gestures are dangerous then doesn't mean it's going to disappear from this world, because we do so many dangerous things, you know. People didn't, you know, I don't know, kiss people who have flu, you know. And I guess that, you know, that what's going to happen is that people will hug again and kiss again, but it will be dangerous, and they will only hug and kiss the people who they think are worth this danger. You know, no more fake hugs. If somebody hugs you, he's willing to take a risk.
No more fake hugs? Oh, it doesn't sound that good.
You miss those fake hugs, Evan. You miss the fake hugs.
But it's funny because the fake hugs also remind me of something I've noticed, which is like I do my work by the phone now or video, but at the top of the call, you meet someone new. You don't just say, "I'm great. How are you?" Great. It would be so blatantly a lie. It was a lie before, right? It's just that now it's like, I'm not going to lie to someone. Everyone has experienced, you know, in the United States, we have all kinds of problems. It's like, I'm not going to pretend that I'm fine, because we all understand that we are in a shared state of something else. And that means we're being more honest. And to your point, Edgar, you know, like it was never true that everything was great. It was just true that I didn't really want to bother getting into it, right? And now I feel like we are. And that's one tiny, small positive from my point of view. Less bullshit, a little tiny bit more honesty, you know, about where we are, all of us.
And I think that it brings me to some kind of a literary truth, because, you know, there was the Holy Poe movement with Italo Calvino and Ramon Queneau, that they believed that writing is easier when there are constraints around, you know. And when they were asked, you know, for example, why do they write poems with rhymes? They said, you know, because if I have to find the next sentence and I don't have to find the sentences that rhymes, there are too many options. I'm lost. But the moment that you limit those options, then you know more. And I think that COVID has this kind of, it's like this kind of constraint. And constraints, you know, it's like kind of, I'm saying, if somebody ties my hand behind my back, you know, I can say, oh, it's so unfair. Why did he tie me? You know, no. But if I try to break loose, maybe I learn that I'm stronger than what I thought I am. Or maybe that I'm more flexible and I can put my legs through those, you know, wiggle my way out. So I'm really saying that what I look in my voice when I write is really to say, first and foremost to myself, don't feel sorry for yourself. Don't idealize the past, you know, because the moment that you do that, you sink into this passive stance that takes things from you, takes part of your humanity and your freedom away.
Mm-hmm. So what does this mean for each of you in your careers? That this world that we're in now is a little bit different from what we knew until now, and apparently it's going to keep evolving, keep changing. How do you see yourselves as artists, as in all of the things that you do? What are going to be the changes? How are you going to adapt personally?
Well, I think restriction is something that actually stimulates art in general, not just writers, also even dance that are limited. There are, for me, it was a discovery to do film. It was like going back to childhood, where I can actually find myself in a new situation where I don't know. It's a new world for me. And so just feeling this sensation of making something I haven't done before, it's quite an incredible experience. And the fact actually that in the movie bringing it all together into the same frame, someone that is in Japan and in Israel, and making it a very intimate moment between a Japanese guy that actually filmed separate miles away to Israeli woman, I think it's beautiful. This is really describing the situation of like the intimate situation that created. And I think maybe there will be more collaboration around the world, and the world becomes smaller.
But the collaboration will be different from what we've come to expect.
I really believe that eventually, when the theater will open, you know, there will be a lot of passion to go back to the direct interaction between peoples, you know, but the new possibility that opened in this period is something that I think will stay with us, and I hope we will choose the right decision.
So when you were collaborating with on this film, I understand that you and Edgar were in Israel. There was a whole crew in Japan, and you had the task actually of working with Moran, the female dancer. From what I understood from you, Inbal, you worked very closely with her. She was a very integral part of the collaborative process and what was produced, right?
Right. It was like my kitchen was the laboratory of this film. It's really interesting that it all started from the small apartment, and eventually it was projected in Times Square in Shibuya Cross, and today in Abima. And so it was really the power of the intimacy and of the, you know, the small world. Yeah, it was, Moran was part of it.
If I can share an anecdote, because when we were working with Moran, then you know, in the opening scene, she lies on the kitchen table. So we would do the rehearsal on Inbal's kitchen table, and then like at some point Inbal said, "Yeah, now it's time for lunch break," you know, and Inbal would get off the table, and we would put plates on it and eat, and then take the plates off, and then Inbal would fall on the same table again. And there was something kind of beautiful about it. It was like kind of an autarkic system. We didn't need anything. We were the audience, and you know, and Inbal made us food all the time, so it was perfect.
Sounds great. When I saw the film last night on the big screen, Moran was sitting next to me. And at the end of the film, she turned to me and said, "I cry every time I watch it. It's so sad." And I didn't want to say that. I almost said it before everybody here in this forum saw the film. I didn't want to, you know, put any ideas in your head. But I think that that's very interesting too, what she took away from it. And I don't know if everybody feels the same way about the sadness, but I think yeah, it's definitely there. Even if there was lunch going on in the middle of all this, it's beautiful and sad at the same time.
Well, I think that, you know, it's like I have this bug. I don't know why, but I find it very difficult to cry from things that actually happen in life. And I only cry when I see cellular phone commercials, you know, with those kind of models that they're calling their kid and singing him a song. You know, that's the only things that can make me cry in this way. But actually, but I'm fixated that crying and sadness, it's really, there's nothing bad about it. It really means it's some sort of a connection, you know, with your emotion. I think that I'm always a little bit sad, and in moments in which I'm connected to this sadness, again, no, I don't feel bad. I feel human. You know, I think it's other times when it's. Faulkner said that between nothing and grief, I would rather choose grief. You know, I would rather have grief. And I think that, you know, the sad thing, you know, is that nobody let us choose, you know. But if I could choose, I would also choose grief, because nothing, I think, is our biggest enemy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I asked the question about, you know, the future, how everybody is going to be working. And Caitlin, you're in an interesting position where you're the executive producer for the New York Times for scripted projects for Hollywood. So how is that going to change? What's going to change in your world?
Well,
and wait, and when are you going to offer Edgar his next project? That's what we all want to know.
Soon, I'm sure. I mean, you know, I'm always looking for ways to work with you, Edgar. And I think the job is a lot about, you know, obviously reading stories, speaking with journalists, and then thinking, right? And having meetings, of course. And now those meetings are on video. And like I said, you know, the one thing I will say is before, you know, for the last year doing this job, as well as working at the magazine, the Times Magazine, doing some other jobs, I would say, you know, if someone said, oh, I want to make this call a video, you would think, what kind of an asshole wants to make every call a video? You know, like, I don't want to see you. Who are you? I've never met you before. I'm wearing what, you know, I don't want to be on the camera. And now I think it's another way to connect. And I think this is connected to what the film is saying too, right? It's like there's the, you know, we are constrained in some ways, but out of the constraint, something else happens. And I think that's true. I mean, I find myself now having meetings and like I said before, like talking about real things, you know, having young children as I do and thinking about their education right now. You know, I'm talking about with strangers essentially on a work call about like decisions about our family and our life, you know, and worries about like my community, you know, and I think like those things are positive. In terms of the work of what happens in Hollywood is, you know, trying to create projects now that will not come out for a long time and thinking about how this moment will affect what we produce and what we make, both in practical ways, right, in terms of production, right? Like how will we actually have actors together and crew together? And that is all underway. I mean, many people besides me and the New York Times are thinking about that and beginning to shape projects. And we have a shoot coming up for a second season of our TV show, Modern Love, that is beginning to shoot in another week here in the US. So those practical questions are part of it, but it's the thing that's more interesting to talk about is like the more squishy thing, like what will people want? What do you go to for art? You want to see real depictions of suffering, doctors suffering to make decisions during COVID. You know, do you want to see what it's like inside of a hospital during these times? There's obviously many documentary films that are going to come out from this period, you know, but also in scripted, do you want to be transported? Do you want to experience something very different than what life is like for you? You know, how is that contained? You know, how are the stories told? Do you want to, you know, is now a time where you want fantasy because you have too much reality in your everyday life and are too, you know, paying attention to every single political and scientific, you know, incremental change. I think I have no answers to any of those questions, but I think like how my job will change is to try to think about that and try to have creative conversations with people about what art we want to make in the world, what stories we want to be told, and what we want to see, you know. And I think there's no way it won't be affected by Corona and by the virus and by quarantine and this moment, politically and, you know, scientifically.
Absolutely. Edgar, anything you want to say about where you're going as an artist?
I'll wake up tomorrow morning and after the coffee, I'll tell you.
Perfect. I have a final question for you all about audience. Somewhere out there where we can't see them, there are people, maybe many of them, watching us now, and maybe watching us not live now, but at some time in the future. I know I personally, when I do an interview, and I love doing interviews, I watch the crowd and I love the feedback from them. I like to see what amuses them and what bothers them, where they want to linger a little bit and where they want to move on, and what disturbs them and what challenges them and what rivets them. And I miss them. I miss seeing them. You all have a different concept of, we all have a different concept of what an audience is. Anything you want to say about your audiences and how you feel connected to them today?
I can say that, you know, that whenever I have a chance to have a live event, even a very small one these days, I really run, you know, to the hall. And you know, when I talked about creating art as some kind of a cultural resistance, then we had a screening of a TV series that I made with Shira Geffen, my wife, and it was during COVID time, and it was 3 hours. And because of the regulations, the people who were in the hall were not allowed to take off their mask, you know, out of fear that I don't know, they'll get the stars on the screen sick or something. So they had to stay with it for 3 hours, no break, nothing. And I go to the hall, and there were 120 people. I would say about a third of them were elderly people, and they were sitting, and you felt that it wasn't like this kind of blasé feeling, oh, I'm going to see a matinee. It was people who were going on battle, you know, it was people who were willing to take risk on something. And for me, it really gave me this strong feeling that what we do really counts. You know, I think I never kind of measure it in numbers. You know, in the end, you know, you can write a book and nobody will read it, and then one day you meet a guy and he show you that he tattooed the cover to his arm and tell you how he met his boyfriend, you know, because they both like this book, and that's it, you know. And I think that this kind of friction with life, making this ability to be an audience, making you pay for it, making you take a risk for it, makes this meeting even more powerful these days.
Well, I hope that we will be able to meet the people, meet the audience. But until then, I hope that artists, especially dance artists that has no stage to perform, will find new ways of expression. And like I feel I've done in this movie, but really just to continue finding. And there's already in Israel, there's like small shows in apartments, in backyards, and art needs to exist, you know, and I feel the power of it. It starts slowly. I feel we're finding new channels, even if it's small, even if it's just for interaction. We are looking for that. We are waiting for that. And we hope that the theaters will actually open quite soon. So that's important for us.
It's actually, it reminds me another thing that my dad had told me. And this was really like, my dad said always that he likes amateurs better than professionals. And I said to him, why? And he says, you know, like, because professionals are doing it for the money and the amateurs are doing it because they like it, you know. And I remember he told me, I was a kid then, but he said, I would rather make love to an amateur than to a professional. And I really think that there is something in this COVID era that kind of, I think, brings out the amateurs from us, and I think it's a good thing.
Absolutely. Caitlin, any final word from you?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, like, you know, people want to make art and they want to consume it, they want to engage with it, and that's true no matter what. I mean, the Decameron project, working on this bunch of fiction stories. There was two main editors at the magazine working with me, Sheila and Claire, and we would read the stories when they would come in, and we always felt such like catharsis and relief, you know, hearing from different people grappling with the question of where we are in the world, even from writers all across the world, and it was so reassuring, you know, reading even sad stories, reading someone else's perspective. And it helped us feel like better able to understand where we were, even though where we were was trapped inside our houses, you know. And I think you know, art is the thing that does that. It helps you understand where you are, and as well as understanding someplace else that you're being transported to, both at the same time. And that's magical. And there's a need for it, especially now, but always.
Absolutely. Well, here's hoping that all of us here, Caitlin, Inbal, Edgar, and I, as well as the producers of this event and the audience, can meet up again soon, live. But in the meantime, it's wonderful that this kind of event can keep the world of culture alive. So thank you, Caitlin, Inbal, Edgar, and everyone who joined us this evening. And to remind you, you'll be able to watch the film soon. Tell us again, Edgar, outside-film.com.
Exactly.
Okay, that's it. So thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fun.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.